You wake to the sound of bells, not just one, but many. A deep, metallic rhythm echoing through the morning mist. It is 1349, and you are in a small market town in England, perhaps near the fens or the grey stone valleys of the north. The bells are tolling for the dead, as they have done for weeks, maybe months. The sound is not urgent anymore. It's routine, like the crow of a rooster or the striking of a clock. Outside your window, the world smells different. There is the sharpness of lime, the powder scattered over graves, mixed with the faint sweetness of decay. The cobbled street below glistens from last night's rain, but there are fewer footsteps than there should be. Fewer carts, fewer voices. You are not anyone in particular, perhaps a weaver, or the wife of a baker, or a parish clerk. It doesn't matter. Everyone is someone ordinary here. Everyone is afraid in their own small way. The plague has been here for months. At first, it came in whispers, a story carried by merchants from Bristol. Rats on ships, they said. A strange fever, black swellings, people dropping in the streets. The town council had laughed nervously, writing letters to the bishop, asking whether such tales were divine punishment or heathen gossip. Then, not long after, the first body appeared, a fisherman's wife who had been perfectly well on Monday and dead by Wednesday. You remember how the priests argued over whether to bury her in consecrated ground. Some said she might have been struck by God's wrath and should not be honored with holy rites. Others said, the church must show mercy. In the end, they buried her quickly, just outside the north gate, and sprinkled vinegar over the grave. In those first weeks, life had tried to continue. The market still opened twice a week. Bakers sold bread, though with less yeast the brewer had died. And no one knew how to keep the fermentation going. People avoided touching coins. They passed them on, flat stones, rinsed in water, scented with rosemary. The town watch, once concerned with thieves and curfew, now patrolled for plague. They hammered wooden boards across doors where sickness had entered. If your family was inside, you might see a red mark painted on the wood, a sign to stay away. Sometimes, people inside called for water or bread, but the neighbors didn't answer. You think of the cooper's daughter, who once sang in the square. You remember her voice, bright as the morning. Someone said she had been locked in with her mother and father, all of them coughing blood. A week later, the boards were taken down. No one sang again. The air of the town grew thicker, not just with odor, but with superstition. People burned juniper and wormwood in clay pots, believing the smoke would drive out the corrupted vapors. A physician from the next county, dressed in a long leather gown, arrived carrying a beak-shaped mask filled with herbs. The children called him the Crow Man. He spoke little, only instructing the mayor to burn all rags and bedding from plague houses. Few obeyed. Cloth was expensive. At the church, the priest read from the book of Job. The arrows of the Almighty are within me. He said, the plague was punishment for sin. People nodded solemnly. Though many wondered what sin could possibly merit such ruin, others whispered that the stars had shifted, that a conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter had poisoned the air itself. Day by day, you notice small changes. The baker's apprentice begins to bake fewer loaves. The miller no longer opens the sluice gate for the water wheel. His son is sick. The sound of the blacksmith's hammer fades. The town seems to shrink, not in walls or houses, but in spirit. Even the dogs bark less often. One morning, you walk to the marketplace. It is half empty. A few women stand by baskets of onions and leeks. There is no fish today. The fishermen no longer venture out. At the edge of the square, a cart stands loaded with straw. On it lie 3 bodies, loosely covered with linen. A clerk from the abbey keeps a tally on a scrap of parchment. You hear him mutter, 27 this week. His voice is calm, almost mechanical, as if he were counting sacks of grain. You wonder who will count him when his time comes. In the evenings, People still gather at doorways to talk, though more softly than before. They speak of miracles and portents. Someone claims to have seen a bright light moving across the sky. Another swears a hen laid an egg with a black cross upon it. Some townsfolk begin to fast, hoping to appease heaven. Others drink heavily, saying if the end is near, they may as well meet it cheerfully. And yet, in all this quiet panic, life continues in dull persistence. The bread must still be baked, the dead must still be buried, the parish records must still be written. The ink on the clerk's fingers smudges as he notes the names. Alicia, wife of Thomas, John the tanner. Richard, son of Henry, unknown infant. When parchment runs short, he begins to write in the margins, sideways, between the lines. History itself seems to contract to fit into whatever space remains. One afternoon, you watch as the priest, gaunt from fasting, blesses a shallow trench outside the walls. There are too many dead for individual graves. The trench is filled quickly. People avoid looking directly at it. The smell is overpowering, even with the smoke from the fires nearby. The priest mumbles Latin phrases through a cloth pressed to his mouth. He no longer makes the sign of the cross over each body. There are simply too many. Still, the bells ring. They ring in the morning and at dusk. A slow tolling that marks not only the dead, but the passing of time itself. The town has become accustomed to the rhythm, like the beating of a heart that one no longer consciously hears. Sometimes, at night, the bells seem to echo from far away from other towns, other parishes. You wonder if the whole world is ringing at once. Rumours drift in with the traders who still dare to travel. They say that in London, thousands lie dead in the streets. That in Italy, priests flee from their own churches. That the Pope sits surrounded by torches to purify the air. In France, they say, entire villages have vanished. Some claim ships drift empty into harbours, their sails hanging limp, their crews all dead below deck. No one knows what is true anymore. But the fear is universal, carried like wind over hills and across the sea. A few men try to leave the town to escape the miasma. They head for the countryside, only to be turned away by farmers who guard their gates with pitchforks. "Stay where you came from," they shout. "We have no room for plague folk." So the men wander, sleeping in barns or ditches, until they too fall sick. The boundaries between places begin to blur. There is no safe town, no pure air, no untouched ground. Morning, you wake to silence. The bells are not ringing. The air is thick and still. You step outside, and the street is empty. Even the crows have gone. For a moment, the absence of sound feels heavier than the tolling ever did. You realize that the man who rang the bells, the sexton, lived just behind the church. His house is closed, the door marked with a red cross. Now, there is no one left to ring them. For days afterward, the quiet continues. The priest is ill. The mayor has not been seen. The air feels heavy with waiting. You wonder if the plague has finally burned itself out, if there are simply no more people for it to take. You look toward the sky, pale and grey, and think of all those who once stood in this same square, laughing, bargaining, living their ordinary, unremarkable lives. It is strange how quickly normality becomes memory. And yet, in the midst of the silence, you can almost imagine hearing the faint echo of a bell, perhaps from a neighbouring parish, still counting the dead. The silence after the bells becomes its own kind of sound, a deep, invisible hum that settles in the chest. The town lies in a strange half-sleep, as if waiting for someone to declare that it has all ended. But no one is left to declare anything. You notice it first when you pass the market square again. The well has gone still. The rope hangs slack, and the bucket sits at the bottom, forgotten. The water smells faintly of rot. A stray cat drinks from a puddle nearby, its fur matted with dust. You think back to the old market days, the clamour of merchants shouting about salted fish, wool, and ale. Now the wooden stalls are falling apart. A cart, its wheel broken, leans against the wall of the guild hall. A faded notice is still nailed to the door, signed weeks ago by the mayor, commanding all citizens to stay indoors at the first sign of illness. His seal, a blob of red wax, has cracked in the weather. A handful of survivors begin to appear again in the streets. Pale, slow-moving figures who look around as if emerging from a long dream. They nod to each other, but rarely speak. It is too soon for conversation. Words seem fragile. You recognize a few: the smith's widow, her hands blistered from cleaning her husband's forge; the baker's apprentice, thin as a reed, 2 boys carrying a shovel between them. They do what needs to be done. The dead must still be buried, even if the priest is gone. The boys dig shallow graves near the meadow, away from the main road. No one bothers with names anymore. A few make the sign of the cross out of habit. Others simply stare. The ritual itself feels worn down, like a prayer repeated too many times. One afternoon, you see smoke rising from the edge of town. Someone has decided to burn the bodies instead. The smell of ash mingles with the scent of thyme and lavender herbs thrown into the fire to disguise the odor. It doesn't work. By midsummer, the worst seems to have passed. Or perhaps there is simply no one left to fall sick. The air feels clearer. The flies are fewer. Grass grows over the graves, soft and uneven. You begin to count the living, as the clerk once counted the dead. There are perhaps 60 of you now, out of a town that once held 400. Enough to form a semblance of community, but not enough to fill the silence. The survivors meet at the churchyard to decide what comes next. A man named Robert, once a merchant, suggests reopening the market. "We must trade again," he says. "The harvest will come soon. We'll need flour, salt, and ale." Someone else laughs bitterly. Trade with whom? Still, the idea takes hold. People crave the rhythm of normal life, the comforting dullness of it. A few stalls are set up again. The baker begins to mix dough. The smith's forge glows once more, though faintly. The surviving cattle are herded back into the fields. The ploughmen begin to work the land again, their but lines uneven and slow. Something strange begins to happen in this half-empty town. The poor find themselves richer than before. With so many gone, there are more tools, clothes, and houses than people to claim them. The weaver's apprentice moves into a fine house near the square. The farmer's widow inherits 3 fields. For the first time, those who once served now own. The old order trembles quietly, not from rebellion but from vacancy. There is no lord here now. He fled months ago to his manor in the south. His steward lies in a grave near the church. No one has collected taxes in weeks. In the evenings, people speak softly of freedom, of wages paid in full, of labour that might finally be valued. No one says it too loudly, but the idea lingers like a spark in dry grass. The church tries to reassert itself. A travelling priest arrives from a nearby abbey, gaunt and hollow-eyed. He stands at the pulpit and proclaims that the survivors are chosen, spared by divine will. "You must rebuild," he says. "You must thank God with obedience." Yet even he seems unsure. His hands tremble as he lifts the chalice. His Latin falters. You can see in his eyes that he has buried too many. After the service, he confesses to anyone who will listen that he once stopped praying for the dead because there were too many to remember. Faith feels thinner now, like cloth stretched too far. People still kneel, still make the sign of the cross, but often they are looking past the crucifix, toward the door, or toward the earth itself. There are small moments of beauty amid the ruin. The air feels cleaner when the rains come. The wheat fields sway again, golden and quiet. The sound of children's laughter faint. Hesitant returns to the lanes. One evening, you see a woman plant rosemary by her doorway. For remembrance, the scent fills the air. You begin to notice how the town, though scarred, still breathes. The pigeons have returned to the church roof. The river runs clear again. The sky, for once, looks almost kind. And yet, beneath it all, the unease remains. Travellers bring stories of other outbreaks in Norwich, in York, across the sea in Flanders. Some say the plague comes in waves, returning when least expected. You find yourself watching the horizon more often, listening for the sound of distant bells. As autumn approaches, the question of inheritance grows urgent. Who owns the fields of the dead? The manor records are missing. The steward who kept them lies forgotten. People begin to claim land by memory, by rumour, or simply by possession. "This was my cousin's," someone says. "He had no heirs," another replies. "Then it's mine now." Disputes break out. Old friendships fracture. The town that once united in fear begins to divide in survival. A few insist that new records must be written, that the world must be ordered again. A man volunteers to serve as clerk, using the old parchment left behind. You watch as he dips his quill into ink and begins to list names. The parchment, you notice, still bears the faint marks of the previous clerks writing the dead, overlapping with the living. Winter brings quiet again, but a different kind. The snow covers the graves, softening the landscape. Smoke curls from a few chimneys. Life has narrowed to its simplest form: food, warmth, endurance. The plague, for now, feels distant, like a nightmare receding with dawn. Still, every cough draws a glance. Every fever rekindles the old fear. Some keep small bundles of herbs by their beds: sage, rue, lavender, though no one truly believes in their power anymore. You sit by the hearth one evening, listening to the crackle of the fire. The sound is almost comforting, until you notice how it mimics the rhythm of the old bells. You close your eyes and wonder if they will ever ring again, not for death, but for life. In the months that follow, a strange reversal unfolds. Letters arrive from the Lord's manor, commanding the people to return to their old rents and duties. But there is no one to enforce them. Too many reeves, bailiffs, and men-at-arms are gone. The survivors shrug and continue as they are. Across England, similar towns begin to feel the same quiet rebellion. Labourers demand higher wages. Peasants move from one village to another, seeking better work. The old system groans under the weight of its own absence. Your small town, once forgotten, now mirrors the slow transformation of a nation. The plague, in killing so many, has made the survivors more valuable than ever. And yet, in the stillness of winter nights, you cannot help but wonder, what if it comes again? The question lingers in the smoke, in the silence, in the breath of those who remain. The plague has taught you how fragile order is, how quickly the great machine of life can stop turning. By the time the first thaw of spring softens the ground, your town no longer feels like the same place. The old streets are familiar, but lighter, as though the years themselves have thinned. The plague has left its mark, not only on the bodies buried in the earth, but on the way people think slower, more deliberate, cautious, even in hope. The bells ring again, at last, not for the dead, but for Easter. The sound feels strange at first, almost too joyful, as if joy itself needs to be relearned. The survivors gather in the churchyard, their faces lean, their clothes patched. They sing, though quietly, as if afraid to wake something still sleeping beneath the soil. The priest, the one who came after all the others were gone, stands before them and speaks of renewal. He says that the earth is reborn each spring, that life is a circle, that what is taken will someday return. People listen, not because they believe him entirely, but because it is comforting to hear that the world still has patterns. After the service, you walk home slowly through the comfort lanes. New grass grows through the cracks in the stones. The smell of wet earth is everywhere. For the first time in many months, you feel something close to calm. Life, however, has changed its rules. Wages are higher now. The few craftsmen who remain are in demand. The Lord's steward never returned, and no one has replaced him. You hear that across England. Fields once cultivated by serfs now stand empty, and landowners have begun to offer money instead of feudal obligation. A mason who survived in your town earns 3 times his old pay repairing the manor's walls. The baker's apprentice now calls himself master and takes on his own helpers. People who once bowed their heads now speak with quiet confidence. The Black Death, for all its horror, has unbalanced the scales. It has given the living a strange and unasked for freedom. You begin to notice the subtle ways this new freedom shows itself. Fewer people attend confession. Markets run longer into the evening. Young men talk about travelling to York, to London, to anywhere. The old fear of movement has faded. Death has already proven that staying still offers no safety. Women, too, find new roles. A widow runs a small alehouse by the river, something that would have been unthinkable before. No one questions it now. They are simply grateful for a place to gather. There are fewer rules, fewer officials, fewer eyes watching from the manor or the church. The plague has erased more than people. It has erased certainty. And yet, the memory of it remains in every quiet corner. In late summer, a merchant arrives from the coast, bringing salt, spices, and rumours. He tells of villages that never recovered, where weeds grow through the streets, of ships crewed by half-sick sailors who still dare to trade. He says some towns have built walls to keep strangers out. Others have opened their gates to anyone willing to work the fields. You realise that your small town is part of a larger pattern. Europe rearranging itself. Old hierarchies crumble while new ones form. Laws are rewritten to stop peasants from wandering, to force them back to their lords. But enforcement is weak. The world feels as though it has lost its centre and is slowly, uncertainly, finding a new one. At night, when you lie awake, you think about the people who are gone. You can remember their faces, but not always their voices. The silence they left behind has its own weight, not sorrowful, but enduring, like the pause between breaths. A year passes. The town begins to grow again. Strangers arrive. A tanner from a neighbouring parish, a mason and his wife, a young boy looking for work. They ask cautious questions. How many died here? How long since the last sickness? And when reassured, they stay. New roofs rise over old timbers. The smell of baking bread returns to the mornings. The marketplace fills, slowly but surely. A painter touches up the faded saint above the church door, and someone repairs the bell rope. There is a kind of dignity in the rebuilding. Every stone set, every field ploughed, feels like a small act of defiance against what was lost. One evening, as you walk past the church, you hear laughter. Real laughter for the first time in a long while. It startles you. Then you realize how precious it sounds. Still, the memory of fear lingers in strange ways. Some people keep their windows shuttered even in daylight. Others refuse to eat from wooden bowls, remembering how sickness once spread by touch. A few speak of dreams in which the bells ring again, louder and louder, until the world goes dark. You learn to live with it, the half-memory of death beside the full pulse of life. Perhaps that is all survival ever means, learning to keep both things at once. The priest says it was God's will that so many perished. The merchant says it was bad air. The apothecary mutters about rats and unseen poisons. No one truly knows, and maybe no one ever will. But as you look around, you can see what remains undeniably true. The world did not end. It simply became quieter, and then, by degrees, it began to speak again. By the second year, your town holds a fair once more. Traders come with bolts of cloth, baskets of apples, pots, and tools. There is music rough, uncertain, but joyful. People dance awkwardly, unused to celebration. A new priest blesses the crowd, his voice strong. Children who were infants during the plague now run freely through the square, chasing each other around the well. The air smells of roasting meat and wood smoke. Someone lights a lantern and hangs it above the gate. As dusk falls, you look out across the faces, illuminated by firelight. So many new, so many unknown. You think of those who once stood here and are gone, but instead of grief, you feel a strange peace. The dead have given their silence. The living fill it with sound. Years later, you will tell stories of the plague to those who did not see it. You will describe the sound of the bells, the emptiness of the streets, the smell of smoke and lime. They will listen politely, but they will not understand. How could they? To them, it will seem like a legend, something distant, almost unreal. The way you once heard tales of ancient famines or great floods. They will not feel the weight of those empty months, the way time itself seemed to stop breathing. And perhaps that is as it should be. History, after all, moves on quietly, whether or not anyone is ready. Still, when the air grows heavy in summer, you sometimes pause and listen. For a moment, you imagine hearing that slow, familiar toll, a single bell marking the hours of the dead. But it is only the wind, or perhaps your memory, ringing faintly in the distance. The world has not forgotten entirely. It hums with the ghosts of all it has endured. The plague has changed everything, not through chaos, but through the slow rearranging of ordinary life labor, land, habit, and hope. And when you think of it that way, you realize the truth that all history eventually teaches, that the world is built not by kings or conquerors, but by those who simply keep living when others cannot. So the bells did stop ringing, but their echo never truly faded. It remains in the rustle of wheat, in the rhythm of work, in the quiet persistence of the living. And if you listen closely, even now, you might still hear it, the faint tolling that marks not death, but endurance. You wake to the faint echo of your own footsteps. They carry through the stone hall like ripples over water. The air is cool and smells faintly of beeswax and old incense. Somewhere far away, a door creaks, but there are no voices. You are standing in a monastery, or what remains of one. The walls are solid, ancient, built of grey limestone that turns gold when the morning light touches it. Ivy climbs over the lower cloister walls, curling around the empty arches. The grass in the courtyard is tall, left untended for months. It is the year 1350. The world beyond these walls is quieter than it should be. The monastery once held 40 monks Benedictines, devoted to their prayers, their fields, and the copying of holy texts. You can still see traces of their rhythm in the architecture. The refectory benches where they ate in silence, the dormitory where narrow beds line up in rows, the scriptorium where the sunlight used to fall just right for writing. Now, only 3 monks remain. Brother Anselm, the eldest, stooped with age and walking with a staff. Brother Matthew, once the cantor, whose voice has grown hoarse from too many requiem chants, and you, a novice who took his vows just before the pestilence arrived. The others are gone, some buried in the cloister garden, others in shallow graves beyond the wall. No one remembers who dug them all. When the plague first reached the monastery, it came not through merchants or rats, but through charity. The brothers had opened their gates to travellers fleeing the towns. Pilgrims sought refuge, coughing and weak. The monks gave them bread, water, and clean straw to lie on. Within weeks, the first brothers fell ill. The abbot insisted on continuing the offices. "We must pray harder," he said. "God will protect his house." By the third week, he was dead. Now, months later, his robes still hang in the sacristy, untouched. Dust gathers on the altar cloth. The candles have burned low. The bell that once called the brothers to matins and lauds hangs silent, a thin rope trailing down like a forgotten thread. You still rise at dawn, out of habit, though there is no choir to join you. You ring a small handbell to mark the hour. The sound echoes strangely more like memory than sound. Each day begins the same. You sweep the cloister walk, gather herbs from the overgrown garden, and light the lamps in the chapel. Brother Anselm sits by the window, his fingers tracing the grooves in a worn psalter. He whispers prayers. He no longer reads, his eyesight too dim. Brother Matthew tends to the bees, though half the hives are empty. Sometimes, when the wind shifts, you can hear faint singing from the valley below, the sound of peasants working the fields again. It reminds you that life continues, even as the monastery decays. Inside the walls, time has slowed to something almost sacred, or perhaps simply forgotten. You find yourself thinking often about sound. Before the plague, the monastery lived by rhythm, the tolling of bells, the chant of the divine office, the scraping of quills in the scriptorium, all of it forming a single, endless pattern of sound and silence. Now, without it, you feel unmoored. The silence presses against your ears until it becomes almost physical. At times, you catch yourself whispering aloud, just to hear a voice. You recite psalms not because of devotion, but because the words themselves seem to fill the air. Domin, refugium factus es nobis. Lord, you have been our refuge. Brother Matthew says the silence is holy. It is the sound of God listening, he tells you. But you wonder whether it might also be the sound of absence, of something that has slipped quietly away. The library is the only place that still feels alive. Dozens of manuscripts line the shelves, copies of Augustine, Gregory, and Boethius, all hand-copied over decades. The ink on their pages is dark and firm. You run your fingers over the parchment, the skin of sheep long dead, yet preserved more faithfully than the men who wrote upon it. You begin spending long hours there, copying lines by candlelight. The act feels almost mechanical, yet deeply human, a way of keeping time. Each stroke of the quill is a heartbeat. You copy not because anyone will read these words, but because it feels wrong to let them vanish into the silence. Sometimes you think about the monk who copied the same line a century ago. Did he also listen to the wind through the cloister arches? Did he also feel the ache of solitude beneath his vows? As summer turns to autumn, the monastery's isolation begins to feel like protection. You hear stories from travelers who pass by of villages still empty, of fields abandoned, of entire parishes where no priest remains. Some ask to stay the night, and you offer them shelter in the old guest house. One man, a wandering friar, tells you that the great abbey at York lost nearly all its brothers. Only the porter and 2 novices remain, he says. They toll the bells for themselves. You give him bread and a cup of ale, and in return he leaves a piece of parchment, a sermon copied from the Bishop of London, warning that the plague is God's punishment for the pride of men. You read it later and feel nothing. Not anger, not fear, only a kind of exhaustion. Punishment, you think, is too simple a word for something so vast. Brother Anselm dies in his sleep that winter. You bury him beneath the apple tree in the cloister garden. The ground is hard, and it takes hours to dig. Brother Matthew says the prayers, his voice quivering in the cold air. Afterward, the 2 of you sit in the refectory, silent. The wind whistles through the cracks in the shutters. You think of the verse that Anselm used to repeat. In the midst of life, we are in death. It feels truer now than it ever did. That night, you find his psalter lying open on the bench. The last line he had read is underlined in faint ink. The Lord is near to the broken-hearted. You close the book carefully. The silence deepens. Spring returns again, though it feels different now, sharper. more brittle. The orchard blooms. The bees hum again. The monastery, once nearly empty, begins to receive visitors. A messenger from the bishop arrives, his cloak dusty from travel. He counts the remaining brothers too. The bishop thanks you for keeping the house, he says. Many, as have fallen. The church will send new novices soon. You nod, though you cannot imagine it. The thought of this quiet place filled again with voices seems almost intrusive. When the messenger leaves, Brother Matthew sighs. Perhaps it will be good, he says. God does not mean for silence to last forever, but you are not sure. You have grown used to the sound of your own breathing echoing in the hall. The days pass in a steady, dreamlike rhythm. You tend the bees, repair the walls, copy more pages. The silence no longer feels heavy. It feels like a companion, something vast and familiar, almost kind. You begin to notice details you never saw before. The pattern of lichen on the cloister stones, the way sunlight moves across the chapel floor, the faint scent of wax that lingers, even when the candles are out. You think of the monks who once filled these halls with chants and prayers, and you wonder if they ever truly left. Perhaps the stones remember them. Perhaps silence itself is their echo. The days after Brother Anselm's burial stretch into a quiet that feels endless. The cloister garden, once his favourite place, is now overrun with long grass and nettles. His grave lies beneath the apple tree, marked by a simple wooden cross that has already begun to lean. You sometimes stand there in the morning, not out of grief exactly, but out of habit, as though some part of the monastery's daily rhythm still flows through that patch of ground. Brother Matthew spends most of his hours in the apiary. The bees have survived the winter better than expected, and their constant, low hum fills the courtyard with something that almost resembles prayer. Sometimes he says the bees are wiser than men. They work in silence, without fear or pride. Perhaps, he says, God prefers creatures that do not speak. You are not sure if he's joking. The bishop's promise of new novices proves slow to materialize. Weeks turn to months, and no one comes. Perhaps there are no novices left to send. Many of the great abbeys have closed their gates entirely, their lands reverting to ruin. Even the king's messengers have stopped travelling as far north as this. In truth, you do not mind. The silence has become your way of life now. Each hour is measured not by the bell, but by the sun's position on the cloister wall. Prime when the light touches the arch. Sext when it reaches the refectory window. You find yourself moving through the days, without thinking, your prayers and your breathing blending into the rhythm of your steps. It is not joy you feel nor sadness. It is something slower, quieter, a kind of deep endurance. One afternoon, you return to the scriptorium to find Brother Matthew bent over a parchment, trying to copy one of Augustine's confessions. His handwriting trembles. The ink pools unevenly where his hands shake. I had forgotten how to write, he says, without looking up. The hand forgets what the mind still knows. You sit beside him and begin to mix fresh ink. The smell of gall and iron fills the air. Together you copy for hours, your quills scratching softly against the parchment. The act feels meditative, almost sacred. Words written centuries ago take form again beneath your hands. You realize that this, the simple, repetitive labor, is what keeps you alive. Prayer may falter, faith may waver, but the work itself continues. The monastery breathes through the motion of ink on skin. At dusk, you light the lamps in the chapel. Dust dances in the shafts of fading light. The altar cloth is frayed, but you smooth it carefully, as Brother Anselm once did. The act feels both pointless and essential, a small gesture of continuity in a world that has forgotten how to continue. When you kneel to pray, the words come slowly. You find yourself unsure what to ask for. Forgiveness, protection, understanding. You remember the plague's early months, the cries outside, the walls, the constant tolling of bells, the procession of the dead. You remember how the brothers prayed then, desperate and loud, pleading for salvation. It did not save them. Now, you pray differently, not for deliverance, but for endurance, for the strength to keep waking up. The monastery's lands stretch beyond the walls. A few meadows, a mill by the stream, and a handful of cottages that once belonged to tenant farmers. Many stand empty now. You sometimes walk the fields alone, checking the fences and ditches. Wildflowers grow where barley once waved. A lone ox grazes in the distance, untethered. You begin to feel a strange freedom in these walks. The world beyond the cloister no longer feels forbidden. The vows of enclosure were meant to keep the brothers close to God. But now the world itself feels as sacred as the chapel. One evening, as the sun sets behind the hills, you stand in the field and listen to the wind moving through the grass. It sounds almost like chanting long, low, and sorrowful. You close your eyes and imagine the voices of the monks who once prayed beside you. For a moment, you could almost believe they are still there. Then you open your eyes, and there is only the field, the ox, and the slow darkening of the sky. In midsummer, a visitor arrives. You hear the knock at the gatehouse, sharp, deliberate, unfamiliar. Few travelers come this way anymore. You open the small window and find a woman standing outside, dressed in coarse wool, a bundle slung over her shoulder. Her face is weathered from the road, her eyes calm but tired. "I was told this place gives rest to pilgrims," she says. You hesitate. The rule forbids women from entering the cloister, but there is no one left to enforce it. You open the gate. She stays the night in the old guest house. You bring her bread, cheese, and water. She eats slowly, saying little. When she speaks, her voice is low and even. "My husband died last winter," she says. "The village priest said I should go to holy houses and pray for his soul. I've been to 3. 2 were empty." You do not know what to say. She looks around the ruined cloister and nods. "Perhaps God has gone quiet," she adds softly. Later, you hear her singing a hymn in the dark, a voice thin and cracked, but steady. The next morning, she is gone, leaving only a sprig of rosemary on the table. The seasons pass again. Brother Matthew grows weaker. His hair turns white. His back bends. You begin to take over his duties, tending the hives, maintaining the walls. He spends more time in prayer now, though his prayers sound more like memories than requests. One evening, he tells you a story, one you have not heard before. "When I first came here," he says, "I was told that the monastery was a ladder to heaven, that every prayer, every hour of labor was another rung. But I think it's not a ladder at all. It's a circle. We go round and round, day after day, until the motion itself becomes the prayer." He smiles faintly. Perhaps heaven is only the moment when you stop climbing. You think about that, long after he has fallen asleep. By autumn, the monastery begins to fill again. Not with monks, but with sound. Birds return to the rafters, the bees hum louder than before, and sometimes, from far off, you hear the voices of farmers ploughing the valley below. Brother Matthew takes it as a sign that God has not abandoned the world after all. "All things return to their order," he says. But you see it differently. You think the world simply forgets its wounds. It grows new layers of habit, covering what was lost. The silence you once feared now feels almost precious, an endangered thing. Sometimes, when the wind carries laughter from the valley, you retreat to the library and close the door, guarding what little quiet remains. Winter arrives again, sharp and early. The bees retreat into their hives. Frost creeps over the cloister stones. You wake one morning to find Brother Matthew gone not far, just beyond the chapel steps. He is kneeling as if in prayer, his hands folded neatly, his head bowed. His face looks peaceful, as though he had been listening to something you cannot hear. You bury him beside Brother Anselm. The earth is hard, but not frozen. You carve a small cross from oak and press it into the soil. When you return to the cloister, the silence is complete, deeper than before, but no longer heavy. It feels like a final blessing. That night, you light every lamp in the chapel. The golden glow fills the space, reaching up to the beams of the roof. You sit there alone until dawn, your eyes half closed, the light flickering around you like breath. The monastery stands now, as it always has weathered, still, enduring. You have stopped counting the days. You no longer know whether you are waiting for new brothers or for the end of all things. Each morning, you rise, sweep the floors, and ring the small bell by the altar. Its sound is faint but clear, carried by the wind over the valley. Perhaps someone hears it below and wonders who still rings it. You do not ring it for the dead, nor for the living. You ring it simply because that is what monks do, a sound that marks existence, neither pleading nor celebrating. And as the echo fades into the hills, a thought comes to you. If silence is the voice of God, perhaps the smallest sound is the voice of man, a whisper of persistence in a listening world. The first snow falls quietly that year. It drifts through the cloister arches, piling in the corners like soft white dust. You watch it gather on the gravestones, covering the names of the brothers who once filled this place with prayer. The air smells faintly of smoke and cold stone. The world feels smaller, somehow wrapped in stillness. You are the last monk now. Each morning begins as it always has. You rise in the dim light, pull on the same rough wool habit, and wash your face in the same iron basin. The water is freezing, the sound of it echoing off the bare walls. You eat a crust of bread, light a candle, and walk to the chapel to ring the bell. The note is thin and hesitant, but it carries. It always carries. Sometimes you wonder if the valley still hears it. The shepherds, the farmers, the rare traveller who passes along the old Roman road. Perhaps they think it's a ghost ringing, some echo from before the plague. You don't correct them. In truth, you are not sure they're wrong. The days take on a strange elasticity. You lose track of how many winters have passed. The seasons change, like the slow turning of a wheel, the snow giving way to mud, the mud to grass, the grass to dust, and back again. You tend to the garden because there is nothing else to do. The soil is thin now, worn out from years of solitude. Yet the herbs still grow. Thyme, sage, mint. Their smell is sharp, clean, alive. When you crush, then between your fingers, you are reminded that the world still breathes. Sometimes, while working, you speak aloud not to anyone in particular, just to break the silence. You recite the Psalms, or fragments of them, half remembered and uneven. O Lord, Thou hast been our refuge. The words sound strange in your voice, as though they belong to someone else. You have come to understand something about silence. It is not an absence, it is a kind of presence, patient, vast, and watchful. It does not fill the world, exactly. It is the world, when everything else has gone. The silence teaches you to listen differently. You begin to notice the smallest sounds, the flutter of bats in the rafters, the crack of ice on the cistern, the whisper of your own breath when you kneel to pray. Each noise feels magnified, significant. There are days when you feel you could vanish entirely into it, become part of the monastery's long stillness, another echo among its stones. And yet, you do not. Something habit, faith, the rhythm of the hours keeps you tethered. In the spring, the first travellers in years arrive. You hear their footsteps on the path long before they knock. When you open the gate, two men stand there, cloaked and road-worn, their faces pale beneath the dust. Is this Street Bartholomew's Abbey? One asks. It was, you reply. They exchange a glance. The younger of the two carries a sack of tools. The older holds a parchment sealed with red wax. He breaks it open and hands it to you. It is from the bishop. The seal is faded, the script elegant and practiced. It states that the lands of the abbey are to be assessed and restored to the diocese. You nod and hand it back. There is little to restore, you say. The men spend 2 days surveying the grounds, measuring the walls, muttering about repairs and rents. You follow them at a distance, listening as they speak of selling the land or turning the cloister into a prible granary. At last, the younger man asks, "And you, brother? Will you stay when the work begins?" You think for a long time before answering. If I leave, the monastery dies. If I stay, it is already dead. Tell me which is worse. He has no answer. That night, you sit in the refectory alone. The candle flickers against the stone. You recall the first time you entered these halls, how the air had smelled of parchment and incense, how the brothers' voices had filled the space with song. You had been young then, uncertain, full of questions about the world and God. Now you are old, and your questions have changed shape. They have grown quieter, like the echoes that live in the cloister walls. You think of Brother Matthew's words, that the monastery is not a ladder, but a circle. You begin to see the truth in that. The prayers, the seasons, the endless repetition of labor, all of it turning back upon itself, like a wheel spinning in water. You wonder if that was a purpose all along. Not to reach heaven, but to learn how to remain still in its shadow. The workmen leave in the summer, promising to return when the bishop's coffers allow. You doubt they will. The world beyond these hills has moved on. Empires are changing, trade is growing, and men no longer speak of vows or cloisters. Yet, now and then, a pilgrim still arrives. A farmer, a widow, a soldier too weary to fight. They come seeking blessing, not because they believe, but because they need something to believe in. You welcome them, as Brother Anselm once did. You offer bread, water, and a place to rest. Sometimes you pray with them, sometimes you simply listen. One woman leaves you a loaf of dark rye and a single coin. "For the bell," she says. So it keeps ringing. You still ring it every morning. You think of her when you do. Years later, how many? You cannot say. You begin to notice small signs of change. Children's voices from the valley below, smoke rising from new chimneys, the distant sound of laughter drifting up through the trees. The world is waking again. A merchant passes through one afternoon and tells you the king's armies have defeated their enemies, that new trade routes have opened, that prosperity is returning to the towns. He speaks quickly, with pride, his words tumbling over one another, like coins spilling from a purse. You listen in silence. When he finishes, he asks if the monastery will reopen. "Perhaps," you say. "If anyone remembers how." He laughs and leaves a small pouch of salt on the table before going. You keep it as if it were gold. As you grow older, your memory begins to thin, like the parchment of the old manuscripts. Some days, you forget what year it is. You find yourself speaking to brothers long dead, asking Brother Anselm for advice, or Brother Matthew for the time of day. But the work continues. You tend the garden, sweep the cloister, mend what can be mended. The bees return each spring. The herbs bloom, and the chapel fills with light that shifts slowly, hour by hour, across the worn stones. You find comfort in this predictability. The world outside may change, but the monastery remains the same, patient, unmoving, eternal in its slowness. One evening, you light a candle in the chapel and realize that your hands no longer tremble. The flame burns steady, as though it recognizes you. When the end comes, it is gentle. You feel it, not as fear, but as a deep settling, like snow at dusk. You lie in your cot, the light from the window falling across your face. You can hear the bees humming outside. the faint ring of the bell swaying in the wind. You close your eyes and think of the countless days that brought you here. The prayers, the silences, the endless cycles of work. You realize they have become indistinguishable from one another. Every hour of labor was an hour of prayer. Every silence was a kind of hymn. And as the last breath leaves of you, the monastery seems to inhale as though the stones themselves remember. Years pass. The monastery stands empty once more. The roof collapses in places. Ivy climbs the walls. The bell rusts and falls silent. Travelers pass by without stopping. They see only ruins, not knowing that once, for centuries, men prayed here, worked here, lived and died here in quiet devotion. But the silence remains. It settles into the stones, into the soil, into the air. Birds nest in the rafters. Bees hum through the cloister. Grass grows over the graves. The monastery becomes part of the landscape, another shape among the hills. And sometimes, when the wind passes through the arches just right, it sounds like a bell, a faint, distant chime. Perhaps, after all, that is how faith survives, not in words or rituals, but in echoes, not in what is remembered, but in what endures unnoticed. You wonder if someone found this place centuries from now. If they stood among its ruins and listened, would they still hear that sound? When you wake, the first sound you hear is the creak of the counting house door. It's a narrow building tucked between the Weavers' Guild Hall and a row of alehouses in Bruges, sometime in the late 14th century. The air smells of wool grease and river damp. The shutters are still closed, but you can tell from the light seeping through that it's just past dawn, the hour when merchants begin to count their fortunes or their losses. You are not a merchant by birth. Few are. Your father was a cooper, a barrel maker, and you learned early that wood bends only under heat and pressure. So does trade, you've found. The tools may differ: ledgers instead of saws, ink instead of resin, but the principle is the same. The world can be shaped by persistence. Your counting house is small, your trade modest. Bolts of Flemish wool sent south to Florence and Milan, and in return, Italian dyes and alum carried back by the Hanseatic ships that dock along the Zwin. You are one of dozens of such traders, nameless men whose fortunes rise and fall with the wind. Yet it is in this ordinariness that you find comfort. The work begins the same way each morning. You light a candle, open your ledger, and begin to write. The ledger itself is thick, bound in rough calfskin, its pages covered in rows of cramped script. Each entry is a small act of memory. A name, a number, a mark of trust between men who may never meet again. 2 bolts of wool to Signor Di Rossi. On credit. 4 barrels of alum from Lübeck, received. You take satisfaction in the repetition. The act of writing turns chaos into order. Each sum tallied, each trade recorded, is a promise that the world still makes sense. Outside, the city wakes. You hear the calls of apprentices, the clatter of carts, the river barges scraping against the dock. Somewhere nearby, a church bell rings terse. The sound folds into your work like another line of numbers. In the afternoons, the weavers come, men with rough hands and tired faces, their shoulders coated in the dust of carded wool. They bring samples of cloth for weighing, measuring, inspecting. You check the quality, note the color, and argue the price with a politeness that conceals calculation. You've learned to read men the way you read fabric. A nervous twitch means desperation. A sigh means readiness to concede. The weavers talk of guild dues, of apprentices who run away, of new taxes from the city council. You listen, nod, and add their words to the quiet inventory of the world inside your head. You have no wife, no children. The ledger is your family. Each line a conversation that will outlive you. Trade is slow this year. The French wars have disrupted the wool routes, and the ports of Calais and Bordeaux are no longer safe. Merchants speak of piracy and of the king's new levies on exports. Still, you endure. You always endure. You buy modestly, sell carefully, and trust few. The great fortunes belong to the Bruges bankers, the Italians of the Bardi and Peruzzi firms, men whose coin flows through the city like blood. You are not among them, but their wealth trickles down. And you live comfortably enough to rent 2 storerooms and a narrow room above the counting house, where you sleep among the smell of parchment and wool dust. You have come to love that smell. It is the scent of quiet success, not the kind sung about by poets, but the slow accumulation of reliability. Every few months, you travel to Ghent. The road there runs along the canal, through low fields, where windmills turn lazily. You ride a mule, rather than a horse, cheaper, slower, but steady. The journey takes a day and a half. You sleep at an inn along the way, listening to the sound of water lapping against the pilings. In Ghent, you meet with the Dyers' Guild, inspecting vats of indigo, madder, and woad. You learn to judge colour not by brightness but by how it holds in shadow. The best dye, you've learned, does not shout. It endures quietly through time, like a good debt repaid. You make your purchases, sign your marks, and ride home with your goods sealed and recorded. When you return, you always pause at the city gate, not for prayer, exactly, but to look up at the merchant's crest carved in stone, a pair of scales flanked by 2 looms. It is meant to symbolize fairness and labor. You see something else in it, the delicate balance between risk and rest. At night, when the streets grow still, you keep the lamp burning in your window. It is not for company. It is for the ships. From the docks, sailors and factors can see which merchants are still awake, whose books are open, whose credit still lives. The light says, trade is alive here. You can trust this house. Sometimes, a knock comes late, a messenger bringing news from the port, a note sealed with wax, a reminder that your small world is still part of a vast, unseen web. One evening, the message you receive bears unfamiliar handwriting. The seal is Italian, a serpent eating its tail. You break it open and read. To the honourable trader in Bruges, your wool has arrived in Florence. Though the colour did not please the buyer, payment will be delayed until the next fair. You fold the letter slowly. Payment delayed means coin withheld, means another debt unsettled. But this, too, is part of the rhythm. You make a note in the ledger, adjust the sum, and move on. It is not the loss that troubles you. It is the silence between entries, the spaces where trade falters, where promise gives way to waiting. As winter sets in, Bruges changes. The canals freeze. Barges lie still, their hulls trapped in ice. The weavers' halls grow quiet, and the markets thin to a few stubborn stalls. Yet the counting house remains warm. You keep a small brazier burning and wrap yourself in furs traded years ago from Lübeck. When snow begins to fall, you take comfort in the sameness of your work. The world may shift, kings rise and die, routes change, but the numbers remain loyal. You have seen men ruin themselves through greed, reaching too far for gain. You have also seen the patient grow rich, not through brilliance, but through steadiness. It is a dull kind of success, one built on caution, on remembering who owes what and when. But dullness, you've come to realize, is another word for safety. Sometimes, though, you wonder what the ledger would say if it could speak. Would it remember the hands that turned its pages? Would it see your years of labor as faithfulness or fear? You think of the dyers in Ghent, their vats bubbling like cauldrons, staining their hands blue. They work with color, risk, transformation. You work with ink and numbers, things that never change unless forced to. You find yourself envying them just a little, not for their skill, but for their stains. You wonder what mark your life will leave. if any. On the coldest night of the year, you walk to the docks. The moon hangs low, the water frozen into glass. Ships lie moored and silent, their sails furled like sleeping wings. You think of Florence, of wool packed in bales and carried over mountains, of coins exchanged in distant counting houses. You will never see those cities, yet your name exists there, in ink, a faint thread in the vast tapestry of trade. You take a deep breath, tasting the salt of the frozen air. Tomorrow, you will rise, light your candle, open your ledger, and begin again. Because that is what merchants do. Because even in stillness, the world keeps counting. And as you return to your narrow bed above the counting house, the ledger waiting on your desk below, a question lingers in your mind, a quiet, persistent one. When all the numbers have been tallied and every debt repaid, what remains of a life spent in careful balance? Spring returns to Bruges with the soft persistence of thawing water. The canals crack open, the barges stir, and the city hums again with the slow rhythm of trade. You wake to the smell of damp wool and candle wax, the counting house alive once more with sound, the shuffle of ledgers, the murmur of clerks, the creak of scales. You have survived another winter. That is the quiet triumph of your life, not wealth beyond measure, but the endurance to continue. Outside your window, the street fills with motion. Apprentices sweep the cobbles, shouting to one another across the narrow lanes. At the dye shop opposite, a man hauls out great vats of woad, the blue pigment staining his arms to the elbow. You watch him for a moment, envying his certainty. His craft leaves a visible mark. Yours leaves only ink. You turn back to your desk. The day's work awaits. The first task is reconciliation. You open the ledger and read yesterday's entries aloud, checking them against the daybook. The repetition soothes you. Numbers, aligning like prayers. 3 bolts of wool to Ghent. 2 chests of dye from Florence. Credit to Peter the fuller, to be repaid at Whitsuntide. Each entry a contract. Each contract a small act of faith that the world will keep turning. But trade, like faith, is never certain. A messenger arrives before noon, his cloak wet with rain. He brings a letter sealed with the mark of the Hanseatic League. You recognize it instantly. The double-headed eagle, pressed into red wax. Inside, the message is terse. Storm in the North Sea. 1 vessel from Lubeck, lost near the English coast. Cargo, undetermined. You fold the letter carefully, set it aside, and exhale. You know too well what this means. The lost ship may carry your alum, or your partner's, or someone else's, entirely. Until the manifest is confirmed, you wait caught in that peculiar tension of commerce, where loss exists only as a rumor until it is proven. Still, you note the event in the margin of your ledger, as, though the act of writing it makes the uncertainty manageable. Trade is not only a matter of goods, it is a matter of memory. The city's merchants remember who paid promptly and who delayed, who honored their word and who did not. The reputation of a man can survive long after his fortune fails, or fail long before his coin runs dry. You've built your standing carefully. You pay your debts. You keep your books honest. You do not gamble. That last virtue alone sets you apart in a city where risk is often mistaken for genius. But sometimes, late at night, you find yourself wondering whether prudence is just another form of fear. In early May, you travel again, this time not to Ghent, but to Ypres, where the cloth fair draws merchants from across Flanders and beyond. The road is busy, carts laden with fleece, mules burdened with barrels, friars collecting alms. You travel light, carrying only your account books and a small chest of coin. Ypres is a noisy city, built on a cloth and ambition. The fair stretches through its narrow streets like a living organism. Tents, stalls, and voices blending into a single restless hum. You make your way to the weaver's quarter, where bolts of cloth hang from every beam. There, you meet with your supplier, a man named Hendrik, whose handshake is firm, but whose eyes dart like a sparrow's. He offers you a bargain, a batch of fine broadcloth, recently finished, to be sold at a discount if you take the entire lot. The price is good, too good, and you sense the risk beneath his words. Perhaps the dyes were weak, or the weaving flawed. You inspect the fabric yourself, running your hands over the surface. The weave is tight, the color even. If there is deceit, it lies deep. You pause, thinking. A single poor shipment could ruin a merchant's standing, yet hesitation can lose an opportunity forever. You decide to trust your judgment and your luck. You buy the cloth, sign the contract, and arrange. Transport to Bruges. For the first time in years, you feel a small spark of daring. When you return, the counting house feels different. You open the ledger and add the new entry, your pen moving faster than usual. The columns swell with promise. If the cloth sells well, the profit could secure your name among the respected traders of the guild. But days pass, and doubt begins to creep in. The cloth arrives. The weavers and dyers inspect it, and though the quality seems sound, there are whispers. The blue, too pale, the weave too soft. You dismiss them at first, but unease lingers. The buyers from Antwerp delay their payment. The Florentine agent writes, asking for samples before committing. The cloth, it seems, sits waiting in your storeroom, its value shrinking with every passing week. At night, you dream of it, bolts of fabric piling higher and higher, the threads unraveling, your careful ledger filling with red ink. Then, one morning, salvation comes in the form of a stranger. He arrives unannounced, a short man with a sharp beard and a heavy accent, wearing the fine wool of an Italian factor. He introduces himself as Pietro di Corvi, an agent for a firm in Genoa. "I have heard," he says, "you possess cloth of Ypres, make blue, broad weave, uncut. You confirm it, cautiously." He nods, glancing around your modest office. "My master requires bulk for a shipment to the Levant. The color matters little. The price will be fair, if the weight is true." He produces a sealed letter of credit, its signatures genuine. You hesitate only a moment before agreeing. By evening, the contract is signed, the goods measured and loaded. The profit is modest, but the relief immense. After he leaves, you sit at your desk for a long time, staring at the entry in the ledger. The ink is still wet. The line between fortune and failure, you think, is thinner than the thread of a loom. As summer ripens, trade steadies again. The markets hum with confidence. Ships return full of goods. Credit flows. Your name begins to carry weight among the lesser guildsmen. Not fame, but trust. And yet, something in you has shifted. The risk you took, that small leap beyond caution, has left a mark. You begin to look at your work differently, wondering how much of your life has been spent recording what others dare to do. You trade not in goods, but in echoes of other men's ambition. Still, you cannot escape the ledger. It calls to you each morning, its pages thick with the residue of years. You turn them slowly, feeling the indentations left by your own hand. There is something sacred in this repetition. The act of writing itself becomes ritual, the movement of quill and ink, a kind of quiet prayer. Perhaps, you think, this is what the monks once meant by devotion. In late summer, you receive another letter, this one from Florence. The buyer who once delayed payment for your wool now writes again, his tone warmer. Your latest consignment was well received. The quality of your accounts is much admired. If you would extend further credit, terms may be favorable. You smile, faintly. Success, it seems, is its own contagion. You take a fresh sheet of parchment, trim the edge with a knife, and begin to draft your reply. Your handwriting is steady, deliberate. You use the same phrases you always have with God's grace. In good faith, under honest terms. When you seal the letter, you feel the weight of the wax cooling between your fingers, like a coin solidifying into certainty. That evening, you walk down to the docks. The river reflects the sunset in long, rippling bands of gold. Sailors shout, cranes creak, and the air smells of tar and salt. You watch as the Genoese ship, the one that carried your cloth, prepares to depart. The wind catches its sails, and for a moment, it seems to pull the whole city forward with it. You realize how much of your life depends on unseen hands, men you'll never meet, waters you'll never sail, storms you'll never feel. And yet, through all of it, your name travels, not through fame or conquest, but through ink, through ledgers and seals, through the quiet, invisible language of trust. That night, back in the counting house, you sit by the open window. The ledger lies closed on the desk, its cover worn smooth from years of touch. You listen to the city, the low murmur of taverns, the distant ringing of church bells, the occasional cry of a watchman, all of it blending into a kind of harmony, the hum of a living world built on trade, on faith, on the endless movement of hands and promises. You realize that your fortune has never been the gold in your chest, but the steadiness with which you have written each line. And yet, as the candle burns low, another question lingers, softer than the rustle of parchment, but persistent. The older you grow, the quieter the mornings become. You rise before the sun, as you always have. The counting house feels colder these days, its beams bowed slightly under age, the air tinged with the smell of dust and wool. The quills lie where you left them, the ledgers stacked neatly in their places, years upon years of numbers, dates, and names written in your careful hand. Sometimes, when the light is right, you can see faint traces of old ink beneath newer entries, small corrections, forgotten debts, memories of men long gone. You touch the cover of the oldest book, tracing the grooves where your fingers wore it smooth. The ledger, you realize, has outlasted nearly everyone you've traded with. The apprentices who once crowded the benches have moved on, one to Antwerp, one to Lubeck, one to a new venture in Bruges itself. Each of them took a part of your method with them, the balance of trust and caution, the habit of double-checking a figure before writing it down. They call you Meester now, when they visit. The word sounds distant, like something belonging to another man. The city, too, has changed. Bruges no longer feels like the restless hub it once was. The sea has begun to recede from its channels, and ships anchor farther downriver now. The merchants grumble, fearing the port's decline, but trade persists slower, perhaps, yet still alive. You remember when the market square overflowed with wool and spices, when Italian and Hanseatic accents tangled in every corner. Now, there are more silences between the calls, but you find comfort in that silence. The frenzy of youth was never your way. Your fortune is secure, modest but sufficient. The house above the counting room is your own. The debts owed to you few and small. You could retire entirely if you wished, live from rent and interest, let the ledgers sleep. Yet each morning, you find yourself here again, opening the shutters, letting the light fall on the desk. Habit, you tell yourself. Or perhaps reverence. After all, there is holiness in order. Once a week, you attend the guild meeting. The faces around the table have changed. Younger men now, with quicker voices and bolder ideas. They speak of Antwerp, of Portuguese sugar, of voyages to Africa and beyond. You listen, saying little. You've seen enough to know that every promise of new wealth carries an invisible ledger of loss. Still, their energy warms you. The world is moving on, and that, too, feels right. At the end of each meeting, they ask your counsel. Not for approval, but for reassurance, a kind of blessing. You offer it gently, knowing they will likely ignore it anyway. You think of how you once looked at older men with the same impatience, and you smile. One evening, a visitor comes to your door, a familiar name written across decades. It is Hendrik, the cloth seller from Ypres, his hair now white, his shoulders stooped. He sits by your fire and laughs, a dry, broken sound. "Do you remember that batch of broadcloth?" he asks. "The one you bought after I begged you to trust me?" You nod. "How could you forget? I nearly lost everything that year," he says. "The dye was bad. The guild accused me of cutting the weave. I thought you would never deal with me again. But I did," you say. He smiles. "You did, and that saved me." For a while, the two of you sit in silence, the fire crackling softly between you. It strikes you that this quiet, enduring gratitude is worth more than any profit you ever recorded. When he leaves, you walk him to the door and watch him disappear into the mist. His cane clicks against the cobblestones, steady as a metronome of time itself. Autumn brings rain, endless, patient, rhythmic. You spend your days in the counting house, not because you must, but because you cannot imagine being anywhere else. The sound of quill on parchment, the faint scratch, is a comfort. Each number is a heartbeat. Each entry, a pulse of life, continuing forward. Sometimes, you pause and simply listen to the water dripping from the eaves. The city beyond the window feels far away, softened by distance and memory. Your clerk, a young man named Arnaud, works quietly at the next table. He writes with your old precision, though not yet with your calm. His lines are straight, but his mind races ahead of his pen. You see yourself in him, the hunger, the care, the private fear of making a single wrong mark. One afternoon, you find him frowning at a column of figures. "The accounts do not balance," he mutters. You check the page. The error is small, a single digit, misplaced, barely visible. "It happens," you say, correcting it. "The numbers are patient. They always forgive." He laughs nervously, but you see his relief. Perhaps, you think, the best legacy a man can leave is the permission for others to err and still continue. In the early winter, you fall ill for the first time in many years. It begins with a cough, then a fever. Nothing grave, the physician assures you, though his eyes flicker with uncertainty. You rest upstairs for several weeks. From your bed, you can hear the life of the counting house below, the creak of the floorboards, the rustle of parchment. Arnaud's careful voice reading the day's totals aloud. You feel both absent and present your body still, your mind drifting among the ledgers, like a ghost haunting its own creation. Sometimes, in the dim hours before dawn, you imagine walking the halls of memory, the fairs, the ports, the faces of men who once shook your hand and trusted your word. They rise and fade like ink exposed to sunlight. You wonder what they remember of you, if anything at all. By spring, you recover enough to return to your desk, though the walk down the stairs leaves you winded. Arnaud has kept the books well. You find no fault in his work, and that brings a quiet satisfaction. Not pride, exactly, but peace. You decide then that it is time to make a final ledger. Not for trade, but for yourself. You take a blank volume, fine paper, calfskin cover, and begin to write. The ink flows easily. Account of life and work. Begun in the year of our Lord 1456. You record not profits or debts, but lessons. The cost of patience, the value of silence, the interest earned on honesty. Each line written in the same steady hand that once measured bolts of cloth and sacks of wool. The entries are simple, but they feel weighty in a way numbers never did. Trust, once broken, cannot be mended by coin. The worth of a man is the weight of his word. Fortune is only the name we give to to the work of others that favors us. You close the book each evening and feel a sense of completeness. Not victory, not even contentment, something quieter, like the stillness after a bell stops ringing. A year later, you pass the counting house fully into Arno's hands. You still visit sometimes, offering small advice. But mostly, you sit by at the window and watch the light move across the room. The world outside grows louder again. New ships, new markets, new risks. Antwerp rises. Bruges slowly declines. You know history will forget your name. And that feels right. The ledger was never about being remembered. It was about keeping balance. And balance, in the end, is its own kind of immortality. On the final morning of your life, the sky is pale and clear. You ask Arno to open the window. The air smells faintly of the sea, though it is miles away now. You rest your hand on the cover of your last ledger, the ink faded but legible. In it lies the story of an ordinary man, not a hero, not a saint, but a witness to the quiet machinery of a world held together by trust and trade. You think of the cloth, the ships, the storms, the men whose names filled your books. You think of how many unseen lives depended on those lines of ink, and how, even now, the ledgers continue without you. You close your eyes. The sound of the city fades to a soft murmur. Somewhere, in a counting house you will never see, another hand lifts a quill. The ink touches parchment. The first figure is written, and the world begins again. Morning begins long before the sun. The air is still blue with night when you wake, the chill seeping through the rough wool blanket. You rise slowly, joints stiff from yesterday's labor. The ground beneath your straw mattress is hard. The walls of the mason's lodge smell faintly of smoke and damp lime. Outside, the faint toll of a church bell drifts through the darkness, the first call to work. You wash your hands in a basin of cold water, splash your face, and pull on your work tunic. It is thick and coarse, marked with white dust that never fully washes out. On the bench near the door lies your set of tools: mallet, chisels, measuring rule, plumb line, and square. Each one is clean, carefully kept, their edges bright in the dim light of dawn. You wrap them in cloth, tie them with twine, and sling them over your shoulder. The day begins. The path to the cathedral site winds past small houses and gardens still half asleep. Smoke curls from a few chimneys. A woman feeds chickens in silence. The world smells of damp earth and stone dust. As you approach, the cathedral rises from the mist, a half-built mountain of pale limestone, ribs of scaffolding stretching upward like a wooden forest. Men move along the beams, their shapes ghost-like against the faint glow of morning. This is your world, the world of builders. You have worked here since you were 14, when your father, himself a mason, first brought you to the site. Now, 10 years later, the stone answers to your hands. You can tell its strength by sound alone. The clean ring of a good block, the dull note of one flawed within. Every piece of stone you shape has a purpose, though you may never live to see it placed in its final setting. That is the mason's paradox. To build something greater than yourself, knowing it will not be finished in your lifetime. At the yard gate, you nod to the guard, who marks your name on a slate. Inside, the noise is already swelling, hammers striking, ropes creaking, men calling instructions over the din. The air is thick with dust. You set your tools down by the bench and join the others. Today's task: carving voussoirs, the wedge-shaped stones that form the arch above a chapel door. You measure each block carefully with your square and template, marking the lines with a piece of red chalk. The stone is cool beneath your hands. You raise your chisel, position it along the line, and strike once, cleanly. The sound echoes sharp and steady. There is a rhythm to this work, almost musical. Hammer, Turn, hammer, brush away dust. The pattern repeats, hour after hour, until the stone yields to the shape in your mind. You do not think much while carving. Thinking is for the master mason, who oversees the plans. 4. You. The body remembers what the mind need not name. By mid-morning, the sun has risen enough to catch the top of the scaffolding, turning the pale stone golden. The foreman calls for water, and a boy runs with a jug, sloshing it into cups for the men. You drink deeply, the taste faintly metallic, and wipe your face with your sleeve. The foreman, Master Guillaume, walks past, checking progress. He is a tall man, with a beard, the color of ash, his eyes sharp, even in the glare of light. He stops by your bench, examines your work, and nods once. Clean edge, he says. Good line. You've learned patience. It's the closest he comes to praise. You bow slightly in acknowledgement, though inside, a quiet satisfaction stirs. Praise from the master mason is rare and fleeting, but it lingers longer than gold. Around noon, the bell of the nearby abbey tolls again. Work pauses for the meal. You and the others gather beneath a canvas awning, sitting on overturned buckets or piles of stone. Bread, cheese, onions, and beer the same fare every day. The talk is low and steady. Some men speak of wages, 2 pennies a day for journeymen, 3 for those with skill. Others gossip about the town, a merchant's daughter betrothed to a goldsmith, a thief hanged near the market. You eat in silence, listening. Conversation is comfort, but silence is rest. After eating, you lean back, gaze up at the cathedral's tower. It rises above you, incomplete, a jagged crown of timber scaffolds and unfinished pinnacles. When the wind moves through it, the wood groans like a living thing. You think of the generations who will come after you, who will add stone upon stone until the tower touches the clouds. You will never see it finished, but your work will hold it steady long after you are dust. That thought brings a kind of peace. After the meal, the work resumes. The light hardens, the heat builds. The smell of wet mortar and hot stone fills the air. You turn to your bench, shaping the final curve of the archstone. A young apprentice beside you struggles with his chisel. His strikes are uneven. The edge splinters. He curses under his breath. You step over, take the chisel from his hand, and show him. Angle it shallow, you say. Let the tool do the work. The stone will break clean if you respect it. He nods, watching closely. You strike once the flake falls smooth and true. It is not mastery you offer him, only guidance. But in the mason's lodge, that is how knowledge survives. Passed from hand to hand, through the dust and the noise. As the day fades, the work slows. The sun dips low, staining the sky with the color of iron. You gather your tools, wipe them clean, wrap them again in cloth. The foreman inspects the benches, counting finished stones. When he reaches yours, he marks a small notch on his tally board, one for each perfect piece. You glance down the yard. The blocks line up like soldiers, ready to take their places in the growing cathedral. You feel a quiet pride, though no one will ever know which stones were yours. In the mason's world, names are unimportant. The work itself is the only lasting mark. When you leave the yard, the air outside feels soft, almost gentle after the din. The sky is streaked with the last light of day. You walk home along the narrow lanes, past the market where the stalls are closing. At the edge of town, you pass the quarry. The sound of chisels echoes faintly from below, men still cutting blocks by torchlight. The smell of dust lingers in the air. You pause a moment to watch, remembering when you worked there yourself. Younger, stronger, your arms aching from lifting stone. The quarry taught you humility and endurance. Now, your skill lies not in strength but in precision. You can make stone fit to another so closely that no blade can pass between them. It is a small art, but it feels eternal. At home, the evening is quiet. You eat a simple supper, lentils and bread, then sit by the hearth sharpening your chisels. The sound of metal on stone is steady, soothing. Across the room, your wife mends a torn sleeve by candlelight. The faint hiss of thread through cloth fills the space between you. You think of how her hands, like yours, shape something lasting. You build with stone, she builds with fabric and care. Both are forms of endurance. Outside, the wind rises, rattling the shutters. The world feels vast and unknown beyond these walls. But here, in the circle of light and labor, life is steady. Later, as you lie down to sleep, your mind drifts toward the work again. The weight of the hammer, the texture of stone, the quiet hum of effort, shared among men who will never be remembered by name. You think of the tower, unfinished but growing, and wonder if the stones you shape today will one day hold up the bells that call generations yet unborn. The sun rises pale and thin over the town, cutting across the cobbled streets like a faint brushstroke. You awaken to the usual sounds, the low murmur of water from the canal, the occasional clatter of carts, the distant crowing of a rooster. Yet here, at the edge of the cathedral yard, the world is defined not by these noises, but by stone. Every morning, you dress quickly in your tunic and boots, gathering tools from the bench where they lie arranged like soldiers at attention. Mallet, chisels, rule, plumb line, each has its place. Precision is essential. One slip of the chisel, one misjudged strike, and a block is ruined. A ruined block can delay a week's work or more. You step into the yard. Already, the masons are at their tasks. Their faces are pale with dust, their hands blackened with soot and grit. Each moves with a rhythm that is quiet, but absolute. You begin with the arches again, a series of stones to form a doorway leading into the chapel. The task seems simple, but it is not. Each voussoir must be cut to exact angles, and each angle must match its unseen companions. You measure 3 times, strike once, then check your work. The sound of hammer against stone echoes across the yard, joined by the calls of men guiding scaffolds and hauling blocks. An apprentice approaches, carrying a block that is heavier than he is used to lifting. You take it gently from his arms, adjusting its position. Weight is not just muscle, you say. It is understanding. Let the stone move when it will, not when you push it. The boy nods, blinking in the morning light. He is not yet patient, but patience is learned through repetition by watching stone resist, then yield. Mid-morning brings the foreman's inspection. Master Guillaume walks slowly, his eyes sharp as he evaluates every edge, every surface. He points occasionally, mutters instructions, corrects minor errors. He stops by your bench and examines a freshly carved block. He taps the corner with his mallet. The note rings true. Good, he says. No praise, no delight, only the affirmation of correctness. In the world of stone, correctness is the highest virtue. You feel a quiet satisfaction. Years ago, a block like this would have been beyond your skill. Now, it is simple not because you have grown strong, but because you have learned to move with the stone, to let the material dictate your motion. By midday, the sun climbs high, and the yard heats. Dust hangs in the air, thick and almost tangible, filling nostrils, coating the tongue with grit. Water breaks are brief and infrequent. The labor is hard, unyielding, yet you endure. The apprentices often complain, but you have learned that complaint is temporary. The block, however, is permanent. Every complaint is a puff of wind. The stone remains. It endures. The work also teaches humility. Stone is indifferent to intention. You may wish it to split one way, yet it will only split along its natural lines. Understanding those lines, learning to read the grain, the faults, the texture, is the difference between success and failure. In this, you think, life itself resembles the stone. After the meal at the midday bell, the yard quiets for an hour. You sit on a pile of rubble, observing the younger men at work. Their motions are hurried, clumsy, yet filled with energy. You remember yourself at that age, eager to shape stone as if it were clay, impatient with its resistance. You rise and walk among them, offering instruction when needed. Not correction exactly, but guidance, small hints on angle, pressure, rhythm. You notice the boy who struggled with weight yesterday now handling blocks with care, the apprentice who could not measure a line now cutting one cleanly. Teaching is different from building. In shaping stone, you leave a mark on the world. In shaping a man, you leave a mark on time itself. Afternoon brings the transport of larger blocks from the quarry. Teams of men, ropes, and pulleys coordinate the movement. You guide the crane, adjusting angles, ensuring each block lands softly on the scaffold below. A misplaced stone could crush hands or destroy weeks of work. The air vibrates with effort. Every man's breathing is measured. Every step deliberate. You notice how the rhythm of work unites them. A silent symphony of motion and muscle, composed of repetition, timing, and unspoken trust. You think often about the generations who will pass here after you are gone. The cathedral will rise higher, the stones will settle into place, and yet no one will know which hands carved which block. Perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the labor is its own reward. Evening falls, and with it, a soft light that gilds the scaffolds. You pause to examine the day's work. The arches are complete, the stones fit precisely. You trace a finger along the edges, feeling the smooth surfaces. Your hands are blistered, your tunic streaked with dust and sweat. But there is satisfaction in that physical evidence, the proof of a day well spent. You look across the yard. The cathedral is rising in silent grandeur, each stone a testament to patience, skill, and endurance. And yet, it is also a monument to quiet anonymity. Men like you give it form, but it will outlive every name. Perhaps that is why the work feels sacred. Not because it honors God in its height, but because it honors persistence in its making. Night comes, the workmen depart, and the scaffolds creak in the evening wind. The yard is empty, save for the tools left neatly on benches. You gather yours and walk home slowly, savoring the last warmth of sunlight on stone and timber. At home, supper is simple. Porridge, bread, a little cheese. You eat with your family, listening to their low conversation. The world outside is quiet, though you know the city continues to hum. Merchants tallying coin, priests calling the hours, ships shifting on the river. You think about your place in all of it. Not grand, not celebrated, but necessary. Every stone you place stabilizes walls, supports arches, and shapes spaces where lives will unfold. Later, you sit by the fire, tools laid out to rest, and consider the lessons the stone has taught you. Patience, precision, humility, endurance. These are not mere trades, but life itself. The stone does not care for fame, it only cares for fit. You realize that this work, repeated day after day, year after year, shapes you as much as it shapes the cathedral. Each blow of the hammer, each careful measurement, is an imprint of your own persistence. As sleep draws near, you hear the wind whispering through the unfinished arches. It carries the faintest sound of bells, real ones in distant towns, imagined ones in your mind calling, steady, unyielding. You drift into slumber with the echo of hammer and chisel in your ears, the silent cathedral stretching upward in your dreams. You awaken now to a quieter Bruges, or at least quieter to your ears. The city still hums with the low rhythm of life. The river barges scrape the docks, merchants call across streets, carts rumble over cobblestones. But these sounds feel distant, softened, as though the years have filtered them through a gauze of memory. You rise, pull on your tunic, and gather your tools. They are worn now, edges dulled from decades of use. The mallet feels heavier in your hands. The chisels are familiar companions whose weight your muscles remember before your mind does. The cathedral stretches higher than it did in your youth, its skeleton of scaffolds now adorned with partially finished arches and towers. You trace your eyes along the stone ribs and ribs of timber, recalling the countless days you've spent here, shaping, lifting, guiding, and counting each block with care. You are older. You walk slower, your hands marked by blisters and cuts that healed long ago, yet leave faint shadows on your skin. You see the scaffolds differently now, not as a place of labor, but as a monument to endurance, patience, and quiet perseverance. The younger masons still work, their voices carrying across the yard. Apprentices and journeymen alike measure, chisel, and carry stone, just as you once did. Some glance at you with respect, some with curiosity, but all sense that you are no longer merely a worker. You are a witness to decades of rising stone and shifting mortar. You walk among them, offering advice when asked, and silence when not. Skill is yours to teach, but wisdom, the quiet, invisible kind, is yours simply by presence. You stop by a young apprentice struggling with a particularly stubborn block. He curses softly under his breath, and you place a hand on his shoulder. The stone has its own will, you say. You must listen. Strike too hard, it resists. Strike too soft, it ignores you. The work is not just labor, it is understanding. He nods, adjusting his stance, and this time, the stone yields. The satisfaction in his eyes mirrors the same you felt long ago, when mastery first brushed against your hands. The days grow shorter, and with the approach of winter, the yard empties more quickly. You find yourself alone more often, standing before the cathedral and tracing the lines of arches, columns, and pinnacles. Every curve, every joint, every subtle indentation bears your memory. It is strange, this silent ownership. No plaque will bear your name. No monument will tell of your patience, skill, or labor. And yet, you feel a sense of triumph, quiet, unremarkable, complete. You kneel beside a newly laid block and run your hand along its edge. The cold limestone is firm beneath your fingers. You imagine generations of hands following yours, placing stones atop yours, building higher, shaping spaces for life and prayer long after you are gone. It is humbling, and yet, in its humility, perfect. One evening, a messenger arrives with news that distant lands have sent architects and builders to inspect the cathedral's construction. They marvel at the precision, the enduring strength of the arches, and the subtle alignment of weight and design. The praise does not thrill you. You have long since ceased to seek it. Instead, it is a quiet reassurance. The work holds, the stone fits, and the cathedral continues upward, patient as time itself. You reflect on all you have learned, the balance of strength and subtlety, the patience of repetition, the humility of service. Each lesson is etched as deeply into your mind as the grooves you carved into stone. Even in the coldest, darkest winter, the cathedral stands firm, a testament not to fame, but to constancy. At home, your life is simple. Meals are modest. Your bed still straw-stuffed. Your wife's hands still mending and creating. Her own labor quiet, yet visible. Children of the lodge visit, bringing stories of apprenticeships elsewhere, of towns and ports you will never see. And yet, all these details, small, ordinary, repetitive, hold a strange magic. They are the threads that connect life to legacy, labor to meaning. The cathedral may be the most visible result, but the web of care, instruction, patience, and endurance is invisible, yet no less real. Some nights, you lie awake, listening to the wind rustle through the half-finished arches. You imagine the sound of bells when the towers are finally complete. They will ring, calling villagers to prayer, marking time, marking lives, including those who never knew your name. You smile faintly at the thought. Perhaps that is enough. The final winter of your labor arrives. Your hands tremble slightly. Your back aches in ways it never did before. The young masons notice, though none speak directly. They do not need to. You are still among them. Still offering guidance, still shaping stone with care. But the rhythm is slower now, more deliberate. You take extra moments to measure twice, cut carefully, check angles repeatedly. Every block is an 30 opportunity to leave the mark of your life subtle, unspoken, enduring. And when at last you can no longer lift the mallet or climb the scaffolds, you hand the tools to Arnaud, your successor, and step back. You have done what you could. The cathedral continues. The stone endures. In the quiet evenings, you walk the perimeter of the work site, tracing the lines of the cathedral against the sky. Your eyes follow the arches, the towers, the emerging roof. Each block seems alive with memory. The apprentice's hands, the foreman's instructions, the countless days of repetition. It strikes you that the life of a mason is not measured in years or renown, but in continuity. Every block laid is a small act of persistence, a quiet defiance against time. No one will know your name. The records of your existence may vanish. And yet, in every stone, a fragment of your being remains a small, steady pulse, embedded in limestone, a subtle whisper to the future. You realize, at last, that the question that haunted your sleep for decades, who honors the men who build it, has an answer that is not human at all. The cathedral honors them simply by standing. It honors patience. It honors endurance. It honors hands that labored without recognition, shaping the world quietly, persistently, and well. As the final light of day touches the pale stone, you sit on a bench and close your eyes. The wind carries the faint sound of distant bells, the low murmur of life, and the quiet echo of hammers striking stone. You feel the weight of the tower, not just the physical weight of limestone, but the gravity of a life spent shaping something larger than yourself. And in that weight, you find peace. The world moves on around you, yet here, in this place of dust, sweat, and stone, time has left its quiet monument, one not of names, but of work well done. And somewhere in the rhythm of falling mortar and rising arches, you understand. Endurance itself is a kind of immortality. The day begins before sunrise, with a sky pale and cold, and the smell of frost still clinging to the earth. You rise from your simple bed in a way you have practiced for years, stretching stiff muscles and shaking off the lingering chill. The salt warehouses on the outskirts of the town do not wait. Neither do the caravans that will soon move over miles of dirt roads, up and down hills, across river fords. Your hands, calloused and dry, find the rope and pack it carefully. Every bundle is weighed and secured, every crate of salt fastened to the backs of mules or the wagons that will carry it to the waiting townsfolk. Salt is heavier than you would like to admit. And yet, it is precious beyond measure. The world would not turn without it. Meat would spoil, bread would crumble, and pickles would rot without it. You eat little, only bread and a thin porridge, washed down with water thickened with dust from the road. You know that the strength you have must last, until the sun sets and the mules are unburdened again. The town is quiet as you step onto the cobbled streets, carrying your pack toward the main square. Smoke curls from chimneys, dogs bark at a distance, and somewhere a child cries. Merchants are already stirring. loading their goods, checking the seals on barrels of salt brought from the mines far to the east. You nod to a fellow trader. He is older, his face lined from years of wind and sun. His wagon wheels are greased and ready, his mules already restless. There is little need for words. The rhythm of preparation is understood. Salt has its own language, and those who transport it speak it in measures and weights, in sealed barrels and careful knots. One slip can ruin profit, ruin trust, even ruin a life. The first caravan sets off just as the sun clears the horizon. The sound of hooves clattering on stone, of wheels creaking, fills the street. The air smells faintly of wet earth and animal sweat. You mount your mule, adjusting the reins, and fall into line behind the wagons. The road stretches ahead, winding through hills and forests. Travelers meet you along the way. Other merchants, peasants carrying firewood, monks walking to distant abbeys. All of them are part of the same rhythm, moving goods, life, and time along invisible threads that bind the world together. Salt, is more than a commodity. It is life itself. By mid-morning, the caravan has left the safety of the town behind. The dirt road narrows, rising steeply through hills lined with scrub and twisted trees. You check the barrels, ensuring each seal is intact. One cracked barrel can lose you a day's wages. 2 cracked barrels could ruin a month's profit. The mules grunt and shift their weight, balancing the heavy loads strapped to their backs. You speak softly to them, guiding them around stones and holes. Animals, like men, respond to care. Neglect them, and they falter. Treat them well, and they carry burdens with surprising patience. The rhythm of walking, measuring, and watching is hypnotic. You feel the repetition in your bones. Step, check, adjust, move. Step, check, adjust, move. Each motion small, deliberate, necessary. Lunch is brief, taken at the side of the road. Bread, cheese, and water. You rest your hands on your knees, watching the sun filter through the trees. A breeze carries the smell of earth and leaves. There is little conversation. Most men are tired, their minds focused on the road and the loads they bear. Even the silence has its own rhythm, punctuated by the soft clatter of hoofbeats and the distant cry of a bird. You realize that travel, like life, is composed mostly of quiet moments. Only occasionally is there drama, a storm, a fallen wagon, an argument over payment, but mostly there is repetition. Small, steady, unremarkable, yet entirely sustaining. By afternoon, the path begins to descend toward a river crossing. You pause to inspect the wagons. One mule shifts dangerously. You adjust the harness, feeling the tension in your hands. The river is swollen from recent rains, and the crossing is tricky. Too deep, and the mules could slip. Too fast, and barrels could tumble. You lead the animals carefully, testing the water with a stick, feeling the current, gauging the depth. Step by step, the caravan moves across. One splash of water touches your boot, cold and biting. A barrel wobbles, and you steady it just in time. The crossing takes longer than expected, but it is successful. No barrels are lost. No lives are endangered. The river has been negotiated. The lesson is simple but eternal. Patience, attention, and care are more valuable than speed or force. The road stretches on. Forests give way to open plains, dust rising from hooves in the dry afternoon. A wind picks up, carrying fine particles of salt and earth into your eyes. You squint, adjusting the scarf around your face, and continue. You think of the mines, where this salt came from hard, dark, dangerous places where men worked with picks and fire, extracting life from stone. You think of the towns waiting for the delivery. Bakers, butchers, families who will eat more safely because of your effort. It is easy to feel insignificant along such a road. The work is repetitive, the progress slow, the rewards small. Yet the world moves forward, precisely because of such unnoticed labor.